program.
What you talking about?
The program. The program. Get with the program.
Everybody clap to this. Say what?
Get with the program.
It starts now.
Hello and welcome to Get With The Program Radio Show. I'm your host, Gary Jones. Now, Get With The Program Radio Show is a multicultural, informative, relevant, entertaining, 1 hour weekly show offering you a combination of diverse interviews with questions and comments. And as always, we will act as a positive source of information. Now, listen, if you want to be a guest on the show, all you have to do is log into www.getwiththeprogram.biz, shoot me an email, leave me a message. You never know, you may have a conversation that we would love to talk about. Or give me a call at 919-665-1118, 919-665-1118, or call me on the cell, 919-255-2757. Now listen, today we're going to be joining a conversation with Don Blagrove. Don Blagrove is an attorney and a proud graduate of Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, FAMU, and North Carolina Central School of Law. Blagrove has worked as a post-conviction staff attorney with North Carolina Prisoner Legal Services, where she co-managed the jail credit team of 5 paralegals dedicated to jail credit issues. Now, Blagrove's experience as a post-conviction attorney combined with her undergraduate training in secondary education fueled her passion for educating youth and the public about challenges in the criminal justice system as an executive director of EMANCIPATE, North Carolina. Hello, Attorney Blagrove. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you here. And, it's been a while trying to get you here, but we got you here now, right?
I'm here.
Good. It's a lot of things going on, Don. We're going to touch a lot of interesting topics today. But before we get started, tell me a little about yourself. Where you from and how you got here?
Okay. I grew up actually in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The parents are the child of Panthers. So I was raised in a very Black nationalist household. I always, my entire life, been very committed to the advancement of liberation and freedom for Black folks. And so that's kind of what has guided my life. I went to FAMU for school because it was way too cold in Wisconsin and I needed to be someplace warm. So Florida was it. And met my husband and we joined together to become a fierce couple and with a plan to help, free our people.
It's cold in Wisconsin.
Sorry.
Minnesota and all that stuff like that. I have a family member in Minnesota right now. She tells me to get 40 below zero.
It's a different kind of cold. It's the kind of cold I don't listen. When I don't go home. My brother still lives there. He has 4 daughters. And the only time I go home is for funerals and weddings. That's it.
You said it's a different type of cold.
It's a different type of cold. It's the kind of cold to get in your bones.
Wow. Interesting. Well, it's good to have you here today. It's a pleasure. Now, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff. I guess I want to start with this right here. What do you see as a problem in the justice systems for Blacks in America and North Carolina? What do you see some of the problems? Because we got a lot going on, and you kind of definitely in that arena.
Yeah, I would say I'm definitely squarely in that arena. The problems within the system are the system itself. The system itself needs to be torn down, which is the work that EMANCIPATE is dedicated to doing, and reimagined and rebuilt. Why? Because the system that we have right now is not built on justice. It is not built on safety. It is built on, and the direct derivative of chattel slavery, and it is built upon institutional and systemic racism. It is built on controlling Black bodies. It is built on controlling brown bodies. It is built on suppressing and exploiting the poor. And ultimately, it is designed, like all systems in America, are designed to uphold white privilege and white supremacy. And until we can disrupt the foundation of our current criminal justice system in a way that is transformative, no change is going to make it better. We have got to start over.
Wow. Now, EMANCIPATE North Carolina. I see the website and I hear a lot about what you're doing. Tell me about the organization.
I'm incredibly proud of the work of EMANCIPATE NC. EMANCIPATE NC is an organization that is committed to ending mass incarceration and stopping systemic and institutional racism wherever we see it. The way that manifests itself in EMANCIPATE, with EMANCIPATE NC, is that we do a tremendous amount of work where we are standing with the people to fight against a system that is terribly biased and terribly corrupt. And it is designed to not offer real safety or real accountability to anybody that works inside of it. So we stand with the people. We do that by offering community trainings, because we believe it is so important that the people understand the roles that our elected officials play in their lives, right? So many times we do trainings on the roles of district attorneys, sheriffs, judges. Make no mistake, the district attorney is the most powerful person within the criminal justice system. But so few people understand what that role means, what kind of power they have, and what kind of transformative things that they could do to change the system and change the way the system shows up in our lives. So EMANCIPATE goes out into the community and we educate people. Now, we are not an organization that you will ever hear us saying we are giving the people power, because the people have power. The people don't need to be given power. You can't give power to someone else. What we do is help people excavate their own power. Find the power that is lying dormant in them. Find the power that the majority has suppressed and made them believe that they don't have. We help them excavate that power, and then we give them the tools to use that power in a way to create transformative changes in their own community.
That's wonderful. So you're providing training and making sure they actually holding their hands, carrying them along. That is perfect.
Holding their hands, carrying them along. We do litigation, impact litigation about for things that will impact and support justice-involved people. For example, one of the things that we're very proud of was during COVID, when the North Carolina prison system was doing an incredibly poor job of protecting incarcerated people during COVID. We filed a lawsuit, we fought the giant, and ultimately were able to settle so that about 3,500 people could be released early from prison, because it was just such an unsafe environment, and there was no way that people could quarantine in that aggregate living space in a way that was safe or healthy or humane.
Wow. Now, there's a lot of people incarcerated who are there for unjust reasons, and they're there for reasons of nothing that they've done. Now, Emancipate North Carolina, how do people get in contact with you?
You can visit our website. That is emancipatenc.org. We have a Facebook page that is very active. We have a Twitter page that is active, and we have an Instagram page that is active. So please find us on social media. Also, when you go to our website, you can sign up to be included in our mailing list. About twice a month, we send out updates about the work that we're doing, action items that people can do to get involved, ways that we can come into your communities if you need our help, and just ways we use our website as a way to change the narrative around criminal justice issues.
Now, one of the questions I know you had mentioned to me, what are the most pressing issues for 2022 and beyond? Because we know a lot is going on, but what are some of the most pressing issues you see?
So some of the most pressing issues right now, again, is police accountability. One of the things that we have got to, over the last 2 years, what we saw was an incredible awakening in the consciousness of America about the unfair treatment or the disparate treatment of Black and brown and poor people by law enforcement than white folks. And once people became aware, consciously aware, that's a whole different conversation. But once they became consciously aware, once they saw the harm that was being caused, people start demanding change in a way that I think has been, we haven't seen in decades. So we have the momentum on our side to create change. So police accountability is going to be one of the most important issues that we tackle right now. In Raleigh, we are seeing some really, like we started off the year in the Triangle with somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 police-involved shootings. That is just an incredible number and use of force unnecessarily in such a short period of time. Law enforcement is afraid. The establishment is afraid of the power and the change of the people. And now that the people have rediscovered the power that they have to demand equity and fairness and accountability for law enforcement officers that terrorize our communities, well, law enforcement is on the ropes, and we have a responsibility to keep them on the ropes.
You know, what's interesting is that the police get treated differently once a crime that they've committed. And I've noticed that in several instances. Why do you think they are not getting treated, properly, getting charged for a crime that they've done, particularly when they've killed somebody and it's unjust? How do when they do things like suspend them from work without pay or with pay, but at the same time they still have a job and they still have medical benefits? So why do you think they're not getting that treatment?
They're not getting that treatment because the reality is that no matter whether we want to say it out loud or not, these law enforcement officers that are committing crimes against Black and brown people are doing their job. They are doing what law enforcement was designed to do. They are doing what law enforcement is designed to do. And so the system itself is not created in a way that will penalize them for doing what the system wants it to do, which is uphold white supremacy, which is uphold white privilege, which is uphold capitalism, right? So it is hard for the system. It's just like when we look at the insurrection on January 6th, right? It took them forever. It took forever to hold those folks accountable, and many of them will never be held accountable for storming and trashing the U.S. Capitol. Why? Because the system is not designed to hold accountable, punish, and control white bodies. And because it is not designed to do that, when white bodies en masse act a fool, the system is... the brain of the system strips gears. It doesn't know what to do when it has to hold large groups of white folks accountable, because that's not what it's designed to do. So it is so hard to hold law enforcement accountable because it is so deeply entrenched in the psyches of America that law enforcement is and are the good guys, despite the fact that we see so many times that is not the case. Just here recently in Raleigh, we saw law enforcement called for a situation where provocateurs come into an establishment, throw food, act a fool, right? The people inside the restaurant call the police. The police show up. And what happens? The people who called them for help end up being arrested. We have got to stop. We have got to untether our sense of personal safety from law enforcement, because law enforcement does not keep us safe. But they do keep safe capitalist systems, capitalist structures, and white privilege. And it is because it is designed to keep those things safe, and not all of us safe, that we do not see real accountability when law enforcement harms or commits crimes against Black, brown, and poor people.
You know what we're gonna do, Don? That's a very, very good point. We're gonna take a break, and when we come back, I hear a lot about this in the news, defunding the police, because I hear people asking me all the time, when we say defund the police, what are we talking about? What are we talking about not giving or getting back, and what is the reason for it? Once again, you listen to Get With The Program Radio Show. I'm your host, Gary Jones. Today, we're joining a conversation with attorney Don Blagrove. And listen, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back after this. Hello, and welcome back to Get With The Program Radio Show. Again, I'm in conversation today with attorney Don Blagrove. We're having some wonderful conversations pretty much about what's going on in Black America, because it's a lot going on right now. Hello, attorney Blagrove. Welcome back to the show.
So glad to be here and continue our conversation.
I am too. Before we took the break, I asked you the question about the meaning of defunding the police, because a lot of people want to know exactly what are we talking about, because we heard it come into the news for a bit and then it kind of evaporated. It went away. What is that all about?
Okay. So let's, first of all, defund the police is not a phrase that people should be afraid of. It is a phrase that people should be intrigued by, right? Mm-hmm. In Raleigh, for example, almost a third of the city budget goes to the police department. A third. In a city where poor people where working class people can't find places to live, can't afford to find, are living in hotels, extended stay hotels, because they can't afford rent anywhere. In a city where homelessness is running rampant. In a city where unemployment is a problem, where over-criminalization of Black and brown communities is a problem, where over-policing is a problem, we are spending a third of the city budget on law enforcement. Why? Because here's why. Because we have it in our minds. We have been convinced. We have been brainwashed. We have been led astray to believe that law enforcement is and should be all-encompassing. That is ridiculous. Law enforcement has no business. I'll tell you what. I'm sorry. Let me. It helps better if we do it by stories. So the Daniel Tertius, who was just recently shot and killed by RPD after a car accident because he would not drop a small pocket knife, despite the fact that he was not harming or injuring anyone or even threatening anyone. Let's talk about the conversation so often centers around, well, he had a knife. Well, blah, blah, blah. What is law enforcement supposed to do? We defund the police is about starting that conversation sooner. Here's the real question. Why do we need armed law enforcement at traffic stops? Why are they there? Aren't there people who are better suited? Maybe we send out insurance agents. Maybe we send out, obviously we send out medics and people who can help with first responders. But why are armed guards needed at a car accident? Why do we need police officers to patrol parks and tell teenagers that they can't be there after dark? Why do we call the police for anything? We don't really need them. They don't keep us safe. Mm-hmm. They don't de-escalate. And more importantly, they bring violence to most situations. Right? Mm-hmm. Defunding the police is about taking the massive amount of money that is given to law enforcement and redistributing those funds to places in our communities where services are being offered that actually get at some of the societal problems that lead to escalated police interactions in the first place. Make no mistake, there is a nexus between poverty and being justice involved, right? Mm-hmm. If we really wanted to help the people, we would divest from law enforcement and invest in people. When people are able to afford housing, when people have good access to health care, when people have good jobs, when people's children are in good schools, you don't have conflict. Conflict arises because people are desperate. And what makes people desperate is poverty. Defunding the police and investing in people. We need to divest from systems, invest in people. Make sure that people have the training that they need to get jobs. Make sure that we are removing the barriers to success, like all of the barriers that come with being justice involved, with having a criminal record, how hard it is to find work. Let's get all of that foolishness out of the way. Let's invest in ways that we can make sure that people are able to thrive, not just survive, but thrive. And the first place that we need to start to invest in people is to uninvest from the system of law enforcement.
So where is this money going to be coming from? Because we're talking about funding the police. And is this taxpayers' money?
Oh, absolutely. This is taxpayer money. Taxpayer money funds the police. And that same taxpayer money can be used to invest in people, to invest in children, to invest in communities. That way we don't need law enforcement.
I wonder who's monitoring how much money has already been collected for this funding, and who keeps up with that, because we don't know where the money is. Who knows how much money it is?
I tell you, you want to know? Your city council. Raleigh City Council creates the budget for the city of Raleigh. They determine how much money the police department get. And that is true in every municipality across the state of North Carolina and probably across the country. It is these local municipalities that determine how much money local law enforcement gets. It is county commissioners that determine how much money your sheriff's department gets. We have control over this money. And let me be clear. Investing in law enforcement is a failed system, right? Let me put it to you this way. If you had a stock that you were investing in and that stock never returned a profit, would you continue to invest in that stock? No, no one would. But when it comes to policing, we have this backwards ideology that if crime is up, then the solution is to put more money into a system that hasn't been able to control crime in the first place. That is nonsensical. Right now in America, we have the highest investment in law enforcement than any other industrialized country in the world. And we also have the highest number of incarceration.
Something's
the
wrong with
highest
that.
crime problem. Mm-hmm. So again, I ask you, if law enforcement is designed, if the investment in law enforcement is supposed to return by keeping us safe, and what we see consistently is that the more money we give law enforcement, the bigger our carceral system gets, the more people go to prison, and the more crime is created, well, that's a failed business. That's a bad investment. And it's time for us to start thinking about better ways to invest that money to get the outcome that we want to see, which is safety.
Sounds like we need to refix the entire justice system and perhaps the Constitution, the way everything has been written in previous years. Once again, you're in conversation with host Gary Jones, and we're in conversation with attorney Don Blagrove, and she's a proud graduate of Florida Agricultural Mechanical University, FAMU, and North Carolina Central School of Law. Blagrove has worked as a post-conviction staff attorney with North Carolina Prison Legal Services, where she co-managed the jail credit team of 5 paralegals dedicated to jail credit issues. Now, Blagrove experience as a post-conviction attorney, combined with her undergraduate training in secondary education, fueled her passion for educating youth and the public about challenges in the criminal justice system as executive director of EMANCIPATE, North Carolina. Wonderful conversation. Don, I also want to touch a little bit about the bail reform. Some states have gotten rid of that. I've noticed on several areas of focus on your website, bail reform. Tell me about that and exactly what are we talking about?
Okay. What we are talking about with bail reform, in a sentence, is eliminating the need for poor people to buy their freedom. Because that's what we're talking about with bail reform. We have people who are incarcerated inside of jails who have not been convicted of a crime and are simply there because they cannot afford to buy their freedom. We are talking about something as simple as $500, $1,000. If you don't have, and who of us has that kind of money just laying around? The reason that our bail system exists in America is for one reason and one reason only. It is to support the for-profit bail bondsman system. The United States and one other country in the world have a for-profit bond industry. It is a rarity.
For-profit.
That means that there are bail bondsmen who have an entire business set up to exploit poor people who are trying to buy their freedom. Here's how it works. Let's say your child gets arrested for whatever. He gets a $15,000 bond. Now, how much that bond can be, depending on where he is, depending on which magistrate he's in front of, is arbitrary. The magistrate can set that bond at whatever they want. There is no universal system for how bonds are set. So if the magistrate you're in front of just had to fight with their wife or their husband, right? Everybody's bond might be twice as high that night. Okay. So that's the first thing. It's very arbitrary. But let's say you get arrested for stealing a $25 package of Mucinex because your baby is sick and you don't have it. Okay. You steal that Mucinex. You go in front of a judge. A judge is supposed to, or magistrate is supposed to determine what your economic situation is. That doesn't happen. They're just going to set a bond. So they're going to set a bond for you for, say, $1,500. Okay. Now, you are just barely making ends meet. You and your wife are both working low wage jobs. You're doing everything you can to keep. And just like everybody else, one paycheck is the difference between keeping you over the edge or not. Right. So this man goes to jail for, let's say, 3 days. Let's say 4, because he and his wife don't have $1,500. Okay. And his wife doesn't have the $150 that she would have to give to a bail bondsman and never get back for that person to pay for your freedom. Okay. Because that's how it works. I don't have $1,500, but I go to a bail bondsman who I give $150, 10% mostly of that bond, that I never get back. He keeps. And then my husband or my loved one comes home because that bail bondsman pays their bond. But that bail bondsman is going to get all of his money back when my husband shows up for court.
Wow.
Okay. So what happens? Let's say your guy sits in jail for 3 days because he can't afford bail bond. He works a low wage job. You know what happens if you don't show up for work at a low wage job for 3 days? You lose that job. Right? You lose that job, you lose income, you lose a paycheck. You know what happens when you're living on the edge? You can't pay your rent. You know what happens when you can't pay your rent? You get evicted. So now your family is homeless and you're unemployed. You've been in jail for 3 days for a crime that you may or may not have committed. Let's say the district attorney looks at your case and says, you know what? This is stupid. I don't want to prosecute this. I'm going to let you go. They just release you. Let's say that. But now you're unemployed. Your family is homeless, right? Now you got to come up with not only a new place to live and rent, you also got to come up with a security deposit, a down payment, first and last month's rent. You already in the hole because you don't have a job anymore. What do? This is for a person who had their whole life is blown up. And this is for a person who hasn't been convicted of a crime. Only spends 2, 3, 4 days in jail.
Whole life is gone.
The whole life is gone.
Don, what we're going to do, we're going to take another break. And I want to mention to you, I did see some other information on the site where it's mentioned that hundreds of children are confined in youth jails and prisons in North Carolina, even despite the evidence that these practices are harmful, unproductive, and inhumane. The majority of these kids are black and brown. Now, Dawn, when I come back, I want to ask you, is that by design and from what system? Listen, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back after this. Hello and welcome back to Get With The Program radio show. Again, I'm your host, Gary Jones, joining conversation today with attorney Don Blagrove. Don Blagrove is an attorney and a proud graduate of Florida Agriculture and Mechanical University, FAMU, and North Carolina Central School of Law. Blagrove has worked as a post-conviction staff attorney with North Carolina Prison Legal Services, where she co-manages the jail credit team of 5 paralegals dedicated to jail credit issues. Now, Blagrove's experience as a post-conviction attorney, combined with her undergraduate training in secondary education, fueled her passion for educating youth and the public about challenges in the criminal justice system as executive director of EMANCIPATE North Carolina. Welcome back to the show, Dawn.
Thank you.
Okay, now, before we took the break, I mentioned that hundreds of children are confined in youth jails and prisons in North Carolina, even despite of the evidence, and these practices are harmful, unproductive, and inhumane. The majority of these kids are black and brown. Now, Dawn, is this by design, and from what system?
It is absolutely by design, and it is the same system that drives everything we've been talking about here today. It is the system of white supremacy, the system of institutional and systemic racism, and the inability of anyone inside of our system to have the courage to recognize the harm that systemic and institutional racism does to specifically black and brown children. So I recently argued in front of the Supreme Court last October about juvenile LWOP, which means that, let me start over. In North Carolina, up until 2019, 16 and 17-year-olds were automatically charged as adults. No matter what crime they did, they were charged as adults. If you were 16 years old, you went into the adult system. We fought very, very hard to get a piece of legislation called Raise the Age passed. And even once the one we got passed was severely watered down. But what it does now is stops 16 and 17-year-olds from being charged as adults for misdemeanors and low-level felonies. But still, for serious felonies, we have 16 and 17-year-olds, some as young as 13, being charged in adult court. Just recently here in North Carolina, we raised the age of juvenile jurisdiction from 6 to 10. What does that mean? That means that in North Carolina, up until the beginning of this year, a 6-year-old could be sent into the juvenile justice system. Could sit at, literally, you would have one of the leading voices within the legislature, judge, or she used to be a judge, but now she's Representative Marsha Moore out of Durham, tells a story about when she was sitting on the juvenile bench, how she would have court where there would be children as young as 7 years old sitting at the defendant's table, coloring in coloring books while they were being adjudicated as wayward youth. So we were able to get the age for juvenile jurisdiction in North Carolina raised from 6 to 10. So that means that anyone that's younger than 10 cannot be found to be a juvenile delinquent, right? And it's ridiculous. It's asinine. All of the research shows that children's brains just are not fully developed. Mm-hmm. They cannot understand exactly what is happening. They cannot understand the full consequences of their actions. And as a result of that, they should not be treated like adults or treated like criminals, because they really do not have the mental capacity in many instances to formulate criminal intent. So I started out by talking about a young man who, he's not that young anymore, but a man who I argued in front of the Supreme Court about systemic and institutional racism in the use of juvenile LWOP. And that means sending people under the age of 18 to prison for the rest of their lives. In North Carolina, 91.5% of juveniles who receive life without the possibility of parole are black. I'm going to say it again. 91.5% of the people who were juveniles when they committed their crimes and received a life sentence were black.
Wow.
Right. Wow.
Juvenile.
Sit with that for a minute.
Juveniles,
children.
So 17. That means when they become 18, then they still going to continue to go back into prison, right into the adult prison.
That's it. They say, I have a client who has been in prison for 20 years since he was 17 years old. And as of right now, has no opportunity whatsoever of getting out. None. He will die in prison. And he's been there since he was 17.
That's pretty devastating there. Now, Dawn, are there still a lot of youth prisons in North Carolina?
We do. We do have a good number of youth. They don't call them prisons. They call them detention centers. But we do have a good number of youth detention centers in North Carolina. Raise the Age has helped some with that, and that number has gone up a little bit because we have been able to divert children from prisons, which is where 16 and 17-year-olds used to go, into just adult prisons, into some of these juvenile detention centers. But we're really working hard to decriminalize youth. One of the best ways to do that is to get these school resource officers out of our school buildings with our children, because what is happening is that these law enforcement officers inside of our schools are over criminalizing our children inside of schools, just like they do on the streets. And what we will find is that there are children as young as 6 and 7 who are Black that are being charged with crimes for things that is just childish foolishness, right? Mm-hmm. That white kids are not being charged with. I'll tell you a story real quick. Mm-hmm. Satana DeBerry in Durham is the district attorney there. When she was elected, she has, since she's been in office, stopped prosecuting juvenile cases. Why? Because when she took office, every single juvenile case on the docket in Durham was a Black or a brown kid. There was not one white child that had been charged with a crime in Durham.
That's amazing. Well, it's not amazing. It's evident that it's happening. Basically, it's evident that it's happening. And it makes you wonder, we know it's racism. We know it's definitely racism. So now, subverting structural racism. That's another whole topic. Before I get to that, though, I want to ask you, is there a profit behind incarceration of our youth? Is this about money? We know it's racism, but is there money involved with this as well?
Oh, of course. One of the things that people don't understand is that keeping people in prison, keeping people incarcerated is big business in North Carolina. And there are rural places in North Carolina that have prisons or juvenile detention centers where everyone within a 50-mile radius of that detention center or prison works for or earns their income off of that prison. There is no other economic base. North Carolina has created a system where in many parts of this state, the only economic base, the only economic source in those communities are prisons. Therefore, there is always going to be a financial incentive for making sure that those prisons stay full and stay active. Why? Because it is the backbone of the economy in many of the 100 counties in North Carolina. Additionally, North Carolina has, Michelle, I can't remember her name. I'm terrible with names, but the new Jim Crow, the girl that wrote the new Jim Crow, the woman that wrote the new Jim Crow, talks about the fact that slavery didn't end. It just changed its name, right? Mm-hmm. We have folks inside of our prisons that work, that till farms, that work in the prison enterprise, which is a manufacturing company that is run by the state of North Carolina, where incarcerated people work for pennies on the dollar to create products. I'll tell you a really funny story. Mm-hmm. In North Carolina, incarcerated people at the height of COVID were in factories getting paid 16 cents, 20 cents an hour, producing hand sanitizer that the prison wouldn't let them have. So they were I want you to think about this. Incarcerated people in North Carolina were making hand sanitizer that when they went back to their cells, they could not use because the prison said they would drink it because of the alcohol content.
Wow. That is something to think about. Mm-hmm. That had to marinate in my mind for a minute. I mean, that is crazy.
Yes, it is.
That is crazy. I mean, this is, Whew, you got a lot of information going on. Once again, you're in conversation today with Gary Jones, host of Get With The Program radio show, and attorney Don Blagrove, and we're having a wonderful conversation basically about racism, law enforcement, structural racism. I mean, it is so much going on, and Don has a broad scope of knowledge about this. Don, you mentioned earlier in the show about the district attorney. Why are district attorneys so important? We know that they are one of the most powerful people. I also heard that the sheriff has a lot of power too.
Incredible amount of power.
Tell me about that.
Okay. Your district attorney, very, very often people look at, we watch TV shows and it looks like the judge is the person that is most powerful in any courtroom. I would tell you that is emphatically untrue. The most important person in our criminal justice system, particularly here in North Carolina, is your district attorney. Why? Because they decide whether or not charges are going to be filed. How do they decide whether or not somebody is going to face charges or not? Because they say so. That's it. They determine what the law is. They determine whether or not someone has violated it. They determine whether or not somebody is going to get bond or not. So when we're talking about that bail bond and those people who have to afford their freedom, who have to buy their freedom, in some jurisdictions in North Carolina where a district attorney has a policy in place that says, unless there is a extenuating circumstances, we are not going to ask for a bond to be set, people go home. That's just what happens because the district attorney has that kind of power. The district attorney has the power to determine when you go to trial because here in North Carolina, district attorneys determine the trial calendar. So why does that matter?
I tell you what, hold that thought. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back. I want to hear this conversation that you're taking right now. Listen, once again, you're joining conversation with attorney Don Blagrove and Gary Jones, hosting It With The Program radio show. Listen, we're going to take a break. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back after this. Hello and welcome back to Get With The Program radio show. I'm your host, Gary Jones. Get With The Program radio show is about bringing awareness to the community. We like to keep you informed. Today, we're joining the conversation with attorney Don Blagrove. Welcome back to the show, Don.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we took the break and you was on a roll about Alamance County. Continue.
I was. Really what I was talking about, though, is district attorneys and the powers that they have. And one of the powers that they have is to set the calendar. That means they determine when people go to trial. I'm going to court in Alamance County to sit with the mother of a young man who has been incarcerated in Alamance County for 4 years. Incarcerated in the jail, not convicted of a crime. For 4 years. Why? Because in reality, the district attorney doesn't have the evidence to take the case to trial. And because they don't have the evidence to take the case to trial, they can sit on it for as long as they want.
Is that legal?
It is in North Carolina.
Is North Carolina one of the only states that's doing it, or is there other states?
No, there are lots of other states that do it. But in North Carolina, because the district attorney controls the calendar, if they don't put a case on for trial, it never gets put on.
Who can change this? Is it the vote or is it the federal?
It is the vote. It is only the vote because, and here's why the district attorney, another reason why the district attorney is so powerful, they don't answer to anyone. The only people that they answer to are the people who elect them. That's it. There is no one to call when your district attorney doesn't do what you want them to do. There is no higher up for your district attorney. They are an elected official, and because they are elected in a local area, the only people that they have to respond to are the people who elect them. Period.
Wow. So who can fire them?
The people. That's it. You fire a district attorney by electing a different district attorney. That is the only way.
So basically, they have to wait their term out.
They have to wait out that term.
That's almost like Supreme Court justices.
Oh, it is. It is.
Wow. So do we have, I guess this is kind of off the questions I want to come with next. Are there enough black DAs? I mean, what's going on? We need more black DAs, obviously, and more Hispanic DAs. We need to fix this.
So here's what I want to say about that. Emancipate NC has started a new program, a new campaign called OPP, Ousting Pretend Progressives. Okay? Because everybody that look like us ain't for us. Right? I don't care what you look like. If you are not advancing and using your power in a way that is transformative and creating equity and fairness for my people, you got to go. Right? So do we need more black and brown district attorneys, judges, people, actors in the system? Yes. But that can't be the only nexus. The other question has to be, are you somebody that cares about equity, fairness, and recognizing the harm, the disproportionate harm that systemic and institutional racism create inside the criminal justice system? If you are not black and a person who recognizes the harm that systemic and institutional racism causes, I don't want you. The people don't want you. We don't need you, right? We need people that understand that they have a tremendous amount of power and that will use that power to create transformative change within the criminal justice system. And I don't care what you look like. Mm-hmm. It helps a whole lot if you look like me. And I would show love for it to be more people that look like us.
But you're right. Everybody that look like us is not for us. That is so true. That is so true. And, you know, I go back and I talk to some people about this. It has a lot to do with the blood. There's power in the blood. I mean, I hear preachers saying it all the time. There's power in the blood. And it's true because the blood has been mixed. So when the blood got mixed, then it mixed the whole thought process of what's really internally going on inside of a person. Mm. Now, do you think we'll ever overcome structural racism? And I hear people say it all the time. Honestly, I hate to say this. I don't know if we ever will.
I have to believe that we will. I have to believe that we can.
I believe that we can, but overcome.
But will it happen? Yeah, I believe that it will happen because you know what? It can happen and it will happen, but it is going to take the work of everyone. Now, here's one of my other big things. It can't just be us, though, asking for it, right?
That's my point.
We didn't create this system. Mm-hmm. We don't have the power necessarily to destruct it on our own.
That's right.
So what we need is good white allies. And a good white ally is someone who is willing to give up their own privilege for the sake of equity, right? Mm-hmm. Those kind of allies are few and far between. But the more of those that we can build, the closer that we get to actualizing a different transformative criminal justice system. But we don't get there without them.
That was my point. When I said we, I know we, as African Americans, won't get there. It's going to have to take the whole system to change that. Now, I mentioned in the conversation earlier, we talked about the power of the DA. What about the power of the sheriff?
Sheriff has a tremendous amount of power, too. And again, it's also very much like the district attorney, answers to no one. No one. The sheriff in North Carolina is created by the state constitution. So the sheriff's office is not, and they'll get mad with you if you call them a department, because they're not a department. They're an office on par with the governor's office, the office of the attorney general. Yes, that is the way they are written into the Constitution. So you have 100 sheriffs in North Carolina, because we have 100 counties, who answer to no one but the voters. But what do? Going back to, for example, those folks that bail bond, right? Sheriffs run our jails. They run our detention centers. They make sure that those people who are there for 4 years awaiting trial get proper health care, get proper access to the educational services that they need, get proper access to their families and friends, get proper mental health care. In North Carolina and in the United States, the criminal justice system has become our de facto mental health system. So what does that mean? That means that somewhere in the neighborhood of 60% of the people who are confined in any jail in North Carolina have at least one serious mental health issue, substance abuse issue, or chronic health issue. When they go into the jail, it is the sheriff's responsibility to make sure that those people are cared for. It's just not happening. It's not happening. So what we find is that there are people who sit in jails who are homeless people, who are arrested because they're homeless, Remember, we talked about earlier the criminalization of poverty, right? Arrested because they are homeless, who sit in jail on a vagrancy charge that carries no more than 30 days in jail. But because nobody's paying attention, that person might sit in jail for 2 months, much longer than the amount of time that they could have ever spent there. This goes back to defunding those law enforcement agencies, defunding the police, right? Because if we took money away from law enforcement and invested in homelessness, invested in access to mental health, invested in substance abuse programs and people who could do those things, then we wouldn't need sheriffs, we wouldn't need detention centers, and we wouldn't need these jails, right? We have to invest in people and divest from carceral systems. Sheriffs also have the power in many jurisdictions across North Carolina, and especially in rural areas where they cannot afford to have their own law enforcement. The sheriff's department is the primary law enforcement agency in those counties. So they are doing all of your law enforcement. We talked about school resource officers. In most cities and jurisdictions in North Carolina, school resource officers come from your sheriff's department. So if you have a sheriff that doesn't understand or doesn't believe that children shouldn't be criminalized, then the sheriff deputies that they send into the schools with your children are going in there with the underlying assumption that your black and brown children are criminals, and they are going to treat them as such.
Wow, this is some good information. Once again, Get With The Program Radio Show. We bring awareness to the community. Joining conversation today with attorney Don Blagrove. Don, this has been a wonderful show. This defunding the police. We're going to try to take a minute on this. Who started this? Defunding the police.
Defunding the police.
Where did this come from?
It's not a new concept. It's been around for decades. I think Angela Davis is the person that is primarily responsible for coining the phrase and creating the ideology behind defunding the police. But it's been around for decades. And this goes to show the power of shifting narratives, the power of taking control of our own voice and using the media in a way that empowers the people and that does not uphold white supremacy, right? Because defunding the police has been around for decades, but it didn't become a part of mainstream American thought until about 2 years ago. And that is because the voices of the people rose up in a way that couldn't be denied and forced this new thought into the American psyche. And that is how I know we are winning. And that is how I know that we can change this system.
Wonderful, wonderful. Once again, joining conversation today with attorney Don Blagrove. Again, Don Blagrove is a proud graduate of Florida Agricultural Mechanical University and FAMU. And she's a North Carolina Central School of Law graduate. Blagrove has worked as a post-conviction staff attorney with North Carolina Prison Legal Services, where she co-managed the jail credit team of 5 paralegals dedicated to jail credit issues. Blagrove experience as a post-conviction attorney, combined with her undergraduate training in secondary education, fueled her passion for educating youth and the public about challenges in the criminal justice system as the executive director of EMANCIPATE North Carolina. Attorney Blagrove, it's been a pleasure. Once again, to get in contact with EMANCIPATE North Carolina, how do we do that again?
You can visit our website, Emancipate NC, or you can find us on social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Last thing I want to say, though, is this. If you believe in what I'm saying, if you believe in the work of Emancipate NC, I encourage you to go to our website, click that donate button, and give. We are funded fully through grants and private donations. And this work is important. If you believe that this work is important, invest in it.
Wonderful. Once again, thank you so much, Don. I believe in it. I encourage you to go to the website, check it out. You got some issues going on. Just take a visit to the website and check it out. Believe me, you won't be wasting your time. Once again, you listen to Get With The Program Radio Show. I'm your host, Gary Jones. As I always say, stay positive, keep your head up, and remember to
Get with the program.
What you talking about?
The program. The program. Get with the program.
Everybody clap to this. Say what?
starts now.